We're going to talk today about particle emitters. And what particle emitters are is essentially it allows you to have sort of a device that will shoot objects out and sort of allow them to sort of float around through space from a central target point, and you can have a lot of controls over this device as you're going through it. So where we locate that is if you go up to the top panel here. Right next to the deformers tool is the particle emitter tool. If you just grab this particle emitter and drop it in, you're going to get a little box that shows up. And when you click play in the timeline, you'll see that there are little tiny dashes that are coming out from that box. Okay, and so these are essentially the little particles that are emitting out from that singular plane, kind of coming forward. What I'm going to do for this demo is just simply rotate this 90 degrees so it's a little bit easier to see. I'm just going to make this 90, and then I'm just going to scroll down here a little bit and so we can see this a little bit better. Okay, so you should have a basic emitter. Kind of just go ahead and start it playing along, and you can see that there's these little dashes that are coming out. And now in order, if we render this out, you're not going to see anything. It's just going to be totally void. So think about those little particles kind of like a spline object, right? If you don't have anything working with the spline, you don't see it at all. The same thing is true with those emitters. So we need to grab an object. And for this tutorial, I'm just going to grab a pyramid because it'll help us to see the direction and rotation of that object. And so what it's going to do is it's going to essentially copy and paste that pyramid and put it in each one of those places where the particles are emitting. So what I'm going to do, so it's not such a humongous triangle, I'm just going to shrink it down. Just grab the scale tool, shrink it down to a little bit smaller, and then what you do is you just grab your object, whatever you want to emit out of that emitter, and drop it, make it a child of the emitter. And then if we play that, hold on. So make sure that in your in the emitter you have this little, under particle, you have this thing that's called show objects. If that's off, you don't see it in the editor. If it's on, you can see the rotation of it. Now with this plane, there's lots of different variables that you can add to this. So if you select the emitter in the objects palette and then you go down to attributes, there's a few things that you can just change immediately. The first one is called the birth rate, and this has to do with how many particles are emitting out of the emitter at once. So right now there's 10 particles per rotation kind of coming out of this particle, and if you change this to, let's say, 20, you'll see that there are 20 more that are 10 more that are emitting out. So you can control how many objects come out of your particle emitter by using the birth rate. Now there's a difference between the editor and the renderer. Okay, so if you choose 20 in the editor and you want it to render out as 20, make sure that you have it 20 in the editor, in the renderer too. So sometimes if you're working with really complicated models and you just want to be able to view it really quickly, you may just want to have 5 of these sort of coming out, but when you render it, you want to have more. So sometimes that really helps just in terms of that process. So that's the birth rate. Visibility is 100%. You can change that down to less. So if we make it, let's say 30%, when it renders out, you'll be able to see 30% of those particles rendering out at once. I usually keep it at 100% because I like to see all those particles. The emission is important as well. The emission has to do with when the particle emitter starts and when it stops. So let's say you have a very long animation sequence, and you want the emission to start at 100 frames, you would just simply put down 100 frames here, and if you want it to end at a certain point, you can have it end. So for example, if I just want a burst of particles, I could have this particle end at, let's say, 30, and then we'll get a quick burst of particles, and then no more will come after it. Okay, so you see how that's happening? It's just a few. It's starting its emission at 0, it's ending at 30, and those particles are continuing on their path. Okay, so that's the start and the stop emission as it goes. Let's see. The other thing that's really important is the lifetime of the particle. So when you're working with a particle, it has a lifetime. It starts at its birth rate, and it will go for a certain amount of time, and then it will disappear. Okay, and so right now it's 600 frames. It's not going to disappear within the 90 frame sequence that we have here. So if we were to make this again, if we make it like 45, for example, it's going to start, and then you see how they're all starting to disappear, like bubbles popping, essentially. They're all sort of moving, and they're essentially popping at different times. Now, the interesting thing about some of these is that there's a variation. So if we wanted to have, let's say, a 20% variation between when the lifetime is, you'll see that some of them are popping at different rates. Okay, so they're ending at different rates. So there's a 20% variation according to how that is read. So if you make it 80%, it's going to be even more variation that you add to it. So you can really play around with these parameters. Anytime there's a variant, you can add different percents to include that. The speed is also important too. So it's going to be 100 inches, 150 inch speed. So if you want to change that, if you want to make it slower, you can make it 30. Okay, and it's going to come out and emit very, very slow. All right. If you want to make it faster, obviously you can make it faster, and it will come very fast. Whenever you're working with the speed, you want to also gauge the lifetime too, because that's going to be important as to how it renders across the composition. So the speed and the lifetime kind of work together. The next one is the rotation. So these objects can rotate in different degrees. So if we just simply make this like 30 degrees, now you can see that they're going to emit out of the particle emitter, and they're going to rotate in 30-degree directions. Okay, and you see how each one is a little bit different? We can control that as well. So right now the variation is 100%, but if you wanted them all to rotate together, if you made it 0%, you can see that all of them are rotating the exact same way as they come out of the emitter. Okay, so there's lots of different variants that you can do to that. The last one is the scale. Right now, at a 1-to-1 scale, it's going to start out of the birth rate emission, and it's going to end at the same scale. But you can have it grow much larger if you want to. If you made this 10, for example, it's going to start, and those things are going to grow. See that? So it starts out at its original scale, and then it grows to a much larger scale. And of course, we can add some variation if you like, make it 50% variation, and you can see that these things are growing at different speed rates. Okay, so there's lots of different ways that you can have really interesting types of rotation. You can have variance in terms of the scale, their speed, the lifetime. All of those things become really important as to how you animate this particle emitter. The other thing that I think is pretty interesting is that once you have an emission started, you can also keyframe the actual emitter to move as well. So if we wanted to have this start out from point A and kind of drag across to point B, you can actually have that emission start from one place and move it across. So let's say, for example, you had a steam train and you wanted to have the smoke coming out of the stack. You can animate that particle emitter along with the train, and it would kind of like cruise along and emit particles as it goes. So, and you could also rotate it. You can do anything you want in terms of the spatial qualities of those animations. Okay, so the other thing too is that you can have more than one object in your emitter. So right now I have some triangles in there, but you can also have more than one object in there. Okay, so now we have triangles and cubes kind of going together. So that's another possibility as well. Let's see. So that's about it in terms of basic sort of particle emission qualities. There are different ways that you can control. There's different ways that you can control the emitter as well. So the angle, the horizontal angle. If we made this 50 degrees, then it's going to kind of come out of this object at 50 degrees. Actually, I'm going to change my particles here. There's too much going on. Just do one. That's better. So under emitter in the attributes, you can really change the angle of these objects, the way how they're coming out. So at 90-degree horizontal angle, you see it's making a much wider splay of particles, and then you can also change the vertical angle too. So some of these things become really important as to how you can control the emission that you're using. And then, of course, if you were to stop and render this out, you can see that all those particles are three-dimensional objects in space, and you can really have a lot of control over the types of rotations and movements that they make. So I encourage you to experiment with that. It's kind of a fun thing to try. It's a great way to just replicate different objects across the page. Another thing is that not only can we use objects out of the emitter, but we can also create particle effects like smoke and sort of not really flame-like things, but more kind of particle cloud-like, smoke-like sort of objects. So we use an emitter for this as well. So if you just want to go ahead and take your emitter and delete the object out of it, so we just get back to that original kind of emission. And I'm just going to go ahead and, let's see, I'm going to make this back to 0 and set some of these things back to their basic parameters. Okay, now if we want to create some sort of smoke and fire types of objects, we want to use what's called pyrocluster. And for this, what you need is you need an emitter, and you also need an environment. Actually, I'm going to stop this one and start a new one so we can have it all in one.